boy. Hi.
Good evening. How is everybody today?
Welcome to our Facebook Live, part 2 on
Yes.
The Body Keeps the Score.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a little cold tonight, so I've still got my coat on.
Russell's got his coat on, and I actually am going to try and turn this light on so you can see us just a little better. Oh, sorry. So, Russell, kind of introduce things while I plug this in.
Tonight we're going to talk about Chapter 2 of The Body Keeps the Score, and we're going to focus on PTSD and what that is and what brings it on. Some symptoms that you might be seeing in yourself that tells you that you might have some oncoming issues with PTSD, or maybe having PTSD right now, and that may be the answer to what you're experiencing right now. We're also going to talk about how trauma affects our core, our body, and the effects on that, and the brain, and the way the brain deals with trauma. So I think we have a really great program for you tonight. And Terry, let's just get underway. What is PTSD?
PTSD. The description is it's either direct exposure, indirect exposure, so like witnessing it. Well, indirect is with police officers and EMS, doctors, things like that. But then you have witnessing it. So it's not just experiencing it personally, but if you witness it. So seeing a car accident, witnessing it can count. The other that surprisingly some people don't realize is learning about the event from somebody else. So if you went through a really traumatic event and you told me about it, that can actually create some trauma in me hearing about it.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. And real quick, I forgot to mention, we have the feed open. So if you have questions as we're discussing them tonight, type them just in the comments below, and we will see those, and you can ask us questions live.
Yes.
And we will try to answer those. So please
join us in our discussion.
Engage with us.
So going a little more into trauma,
Yeah.
there are 5 different categories that you have to hit.
Yeah.
So one of the first is the stressor. So this is that what we just talked about, the direct, the indirect, the witnessing it or having somebody tell us about it from somebody who experienced it. So that is one, and we have to have at least one of those 4. Again, for an adult with PTSD, you have to have one of these, but that's not the only criteria, okay? That's just criteria A. You have to have one of those in criteria A. Then you have criteria B, which is the intrusion symptoms. So this is where you start to see oftentimes the nightmares, the flashbacks, the unwanted memories that surface, the emotional distress exposure of trauma reminders. And that can be just seeing something that reminds you of the trauma and that emotional part that brings up. And then you have the physical reactivity after exposure of the traumatic event. So your body actually physically responds after the event. And again, you have to have at least one of these. And sometimes you can have multiple. You can have flashbacks. You can have nightmares. You can have the intrusive thoughts of the memories and things like that. So you can have multiple here. But again, for the diagnosis, you have to have one of these plus one of A. And then criteria C. And again, these are a lot, so I have my little notes here so I don't forget one. So criteria C is the avoidance. So this is trauma-related thoughts or feelings, or the trauma-related external reminders, and you avoid them, right? We try to not go around it. We like say that I was in a car accident near State Street and Center Street. I would avoid that because it was traumatic. I would avoid that. I know for me, after the car accident that I was in that led me to EMDR, I tried to figure out a way to get to work without having to pass the site that it went. And it was the hardest thing. The first day I went back to work, that I actually drove by that about 10, 15 miles down the road, not even that far. One of my coworkers had actually pulled up behind me because I had to pull over, and I was just in a shaking mess. And she just sat there with me, and she just talked me through it. And it was a very great blessing that she was there. But that is, again, that avoidance that we're talking about, but also that memory.
So on that avoidance, so something could trickle up that happened to us several years ago, and we just kept avoiding it. Is that possible with PTSD?
Yes, it is. And again, we don't realize it because we've avoided the situation, and then we forgot about it. We avoided it for so long, and then all of a sudden, again, we drive by it or something, and that flashback or that memory surfaces back up. So that's a great, again. And again, so you have to have one of these of criteria C. So now we have 3 categories. You have to get 1, 2, and 3. But guess what? That's not all.
That's not all. No.
So then you have criteria D. And this is a negative alterations in cognition and mood. And so this is the inability to recall features of the event. Sometimes we think, oh, I'm just losing my memory. But it also can look like part of the trauma. And PTSD is the inability to recall that.
Okay.
Because your body's so busy trying to survive that it can't take everything in. So it's going to forget some things, right?
Yeah.
Overly negative thoughts or assumptions about oneself or the world. How the book talked about this was like, again, for a normal person, walking down the street and you see another person, it's just another person walking on the street. But if I've been sexually assaulted by a male and it was a male walking down, then in my head, oh, that person is going to assault me. Again, it changes the view and thought process of your mind because of your experience. Or every red truck is going to hit me because a red truck hit me. Things like that. So it negatively affects that inability. So we already covered that one. So negatively, the assumptions of the world. It changes how we view the world. Again, and it usually, again, it's not just a change, it's a negative change.
Yeah.
We don't view things casually. It's really from a safety, protected place that changes things. Again, exaggeration, exaggerated blame of self or others causing the trauma. Sometimes we hear somebody, and this happened to me before. There's a couple of comments if you want to look.
Oh, yeah.
But this happened to me before, was like, oh, you're just playing a victim, when in truth, no, I'm not. I never got a chance to process. I never got this. And so, but it can happen that you can over-exaggerate how much it affected things because, again, your brain is struggling when it goes on. Again, negative effect, we talked about that a little bit, but just the negative effects of it. And that is expanded. This is where it kind of plays a little bit with depression. You have a decreased interest in activities. So you might think it's depression, but really it could be a sign of trauma.
Yeah.
Feeling isolated. I know that for me, there was a feeling of I'm all alone, nobody understands this. Like, I didn't realize that, you know how many people have had a car accident where a child has passed? Well, not just a child, but somebody's passed. I actually sat in my boss's office. Bill, if you're seeing this, hi, Bill. And he was like, oh, I was pulling up, and all these famous people had been through an accident where somebody had died. And I was like, no, it's only me, right?
Yeah.
And so it was something that I thought I was all alone in experiencing. And in truth, I wasn't all alone. And I wasn't the only one experiencing that. And so that's another feeling. And the last one in this one is difficult experiencing positive effect, which again mimics that depression, and we might think it's depression.
Yeah.
And again, so now we're up to 4, and we have to have at least one of these to get that. And then you have criteria E, which is alterations, arousal, and reactivity. So this can be irritability and aggression. Again, sometimes we don't understand that somebody's aggression has nothing to do with us. It has to do with the trauma that they went through, right? Risky or destructive behavior. The book talked about like going on a motorcycle ride as fast as you can and taking risky things like jumping out of an airplane and things like that. Hypervigilance. Oh, I can't even say that right.
Diligence?
Yes, thank you. Russell will say it for me. Heightened startled reaction. So this is that hyperarousal. That's you're on alert for everything, right?
Yeah.
Difficult concentrating. Again, we can struggle, lose focus, and things like that. And then difficult sleeping. But again, see how some of these can mimic depression, anxiety, and other things. But it also, you might be just the effects of trauma. So people can get misdiagnosed. They can also not give everything because they think it's something like depression when really it has to do with trauma and things like that.
I was going to ask you, is depression, anxiety one of the first symptoms or triggers of PTSD?
No.
No.
I think with most of my clients, the most is the intrusive thoughts and negative feelings, and then the reactivity of the body is the one I see the most. Now, usually it does come along. When I see PTSD clients, there usually is anxiety and depression as a subcategory going along with that. The other thing with this, again, so we've got these five areas that you've got to hit at least one of.
Yeah.
And then you have to experience it and be in those for at least a month.
Okay.
So what we usually do with PTSD people who are coming in and we think this is, we actually will diagnose them as acute stress disorder. And those diagnoses are a little different. Acute stress disorder is, you don't have to have it a month. You get the most response in treating within the first 3 months. It's acute stress. So you have all the signs of stress and stuff, and it's acute and that. So there are different diagnoses, but the book focuses a lot on the PTSD. So I wanted to cover that even though you might not be at the stage because it just happened last week, so you're actually going to be in the acute stress disorder versus the PTSD. It turns into PTSD from month 1 to month 3. That's the criteria. And then you also have distress and functional impairment, socially, work, things like that. And then exclusion. Symptoms are not always, and so this one is, you have to make sure it's not due to medication. You have to make sure it's not due to substance use. And that makes it really hard because guess what? In substance use, there's usually trauma. There's usually PTSD. So it makes it really difficult because you have to rule out the substance abuse. And there's diagnosis for that and how you do PTSD with substance and things like that. Or any other illness. I talk with my clients about making sure you have blood workups and things like that because your thyroid being out of whack can mimic depression. Your vitamin B level or vitamin D levels. Again, usually when somebody's going through SADS, which is a seasonal affective disorder, guess what's low? Their vitamin Ds. And oftentimes the vitamin D levels, like they go in and they matter. So knowing those things. So again, there's a lot more, but that's a lot to get just that diagnosis.
Yeah. So once we're diagnosed with PTSD, is it a lifelong diagnosis or can we work through it and overcome it?
That's a good question. Depends. Technically, this is where it gets really difficult, especially with military. Once it's diagnosed in there, you have it for life. Your diagnosis usually follows you, but again, based upon medical records, it's a matter of whether or not you share with doctors and doctors share with. So it's up to you how much it goes with you. Can your diagnosis get changed? Yes. Can you evolve where it's treated and that? Yes. But usually once you have a diagnosis, the diagnosis stays with you. Like when I diagnose my clients, if I put PTSD, that diagnosis stays in their file and it is there. I can't go in and delete.
So is the treatment, is it therapy and tools working through it, or is it medication or a combination of both? It
can be a lot of things. It depends on what the clients need. I've had clients who really need medication to even allow them to be present to be able to do the work that they do. And then gradually what will happen is medication can start to reduce and draw back and not need. I've had some clients who they're just boom, 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 let's go, and that's all they need. I have some clients who it takes them a while. It takes them a while. I think the biggest thing in common I get a lot is I didn't realize my stuff was still affecting me. Sorry, while you look at that, I'm just going to grab a water. I forgot to grab that real quick. I just my
Great, thank you.
You are welcome. We just make things work in here.
Tis the season to be dry.
Yeah.
You know, it's important to stay hydrated during the cold because you can become dehydrated.
You really, and it's really difficult. Your body, my blood sugars.
That's a little bonus
different
information for tonight.
Yes, and what I was just saying is, when I'm not hydrated, my blood sugars, my sensor doesn't read my numbers right. So,
interesting.
Little side note for us type 1 diabetics. But going with that, actually, when I went through my car accident, my blood, or anything that was traumatic, like when Dana had his open heart surgeries and things like that, my blood sugars and stress level were so difficult and it was so hard to maintain. So there is a medical thing that also goes on, and we talked a little bit in that of the categories. It physically affects your body.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And we don't think about it. We're like, oh, maybe it's just I have a headache, or maybe. But it's actually, again, the events that we go through.
Yeah, because a headache or tense muscles is usually a sign of stress. So we know that we're experiencing stress, but
we don't associate it always with what we went through. Or that it could be, again, our dreams. Were you talking about dreams earlier, about having a dream? Somebody was talking to me about dreams earlier.
I think we've talked a little bit about, some of us have reoccurring dreams. And
sometimes a new dream can surface, and it can actually bring forth a trigger.
Yeah. And
it can bring forth and bring surface things. And my way of saying this is, it's usually your body's way of saying it's ready. It's ready to process. It's ready to go there. Having these things surface means your body is ready. Do you want to check in? I see some comments. I want to say hi. I'm assuming they're just a lot of highs, but let's just see if we...
I think right now they're just some highs, maybe if you
can... glad to have the highs.
Work this better than I can.
Oh, well, here, let me try. So, Russell, going with your questions and things like that. What else? Where we go next?
So, let's talk about, because we started kind of going there, how does trauma affect our core, like physically? Oh yeah, I can see those comments rolling in there.
Yes.
So how does it affect our core? Is it a tense muscle? Is it?
It can be a lot of different things. So you can have tense muscles. Your digestive system can get out of whack.
Okay.
One of the things we actually discovered is that we think that for me, when I developed my type 1 diabetes, so we'd been through open heart surgery with Dana. We were going through, we'd actually gone through our first. We'd gotten married, and then 3 months later, we'd been through open heart surgery. We were going through infertility. We were boom, 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 and my body just couldn't do it. That my body finally was like, oh, let's attack itself. And so, again, it can be things. It can be twitches. It can be movements. It can be muscle spasms. It can be, now I forgot what you were asking and I was answering.
Well, how it affects our core.
Oh, so our core. Again, but the biggest part of our core is how it affects our mind and our body.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, the thing that this chapter really talked about is how these things really affect our mind and our body and how we change. We change what we think. And we talked about that, you know, how we can view something and how we get safety and stuff like that. It affects how we do a relationship. Yeah. I often tell my clients when they come in for couples therapy, I'm like, what's your past? What's your history? Because oftentimes couples therapy works, but your stuff can get in the way of couples therapy. And so and that's why I quit doing couples therapy is because so much of it went back to individual work. And by doing your individual work and working through these, you really can't affect those things. So your core is anything about you, your inner, yourself. Okay. Core is self. And so anything that affects yourself, so this could be your mood, your thoughts, your even your images and things like that. You have people who actually like see something and what they see isn't really what's there because their brain has been affected. Yeah. And again, depending on the injury, you also have like traumatic brain injury and you also have medical conditions that arise and things like that. Imagine being in a car accident, ended up in the hospital, and things like that. Yeah. Oh, no, those are all just people watching. Okay, glad no comments yet.
We appreciate you chiming in during this last-minute countdown into Christmas. We appreciate your time tonight.
We do. Okay, so we talked about how the brain. The other thing is that the trauma. It doesn't allow your brain to bridge gaps that it normally can. And so it's kind of like your little synapses. They just don't keep snapping. Yeah. And so it can affect like something that you might be able to, again, going back to like, oh, that's nothing. Your body makes it bigger and then it can't make that jump to, oh, this is just a normal experience. This is just something that's going on. It just can't make those links because your brain, kind of think of it like a big balloon in your head. How much room do you have for everything else when you have this big balloon in there? You don't have a lot of room, and it's going to affect how you do things. You have, after an event, you have less space in your brain for the normal things. Yeah.
So, let me see if this is a little bit of stress disorder. So we all went through COVID together. You know, we all had similar experiences, and I found during that time, because we weren't interacting with other people and we had a lot of time on our hands to think. I noticed that I was reflecting a lot of things that from my past of 20 and 30 years ago, even into my childhood. And my older brother had brought that up too, and I said, "Oh no, I've been experiencing that same thing. Is that kind of a defense mechanism or is it?" It
can be the avoidance, but also can be a defensiveness. We're just not ready to go there. We're just not ready, or we don't think of it as that. And so we can, but again, the other side of that is how somebody approaches things. How somebody approaches things can also affect how we respond. And so we can't become defensive, not because of what we went through, but because of how the person's asking and experiencing.
Yeah. So say I come to you as a client and I think that I have some symptoms of PTSD. We work through it, and yes, indeed I do. So what are some of the first things that we're going to work through as this journey begins?
First, as always, whenever you see a therapist, always diagnosis. It starts, it's a bunch of questions and things like that. Next is coping skills. I want to know that you are able to take care of yourself because you don't have access to me all the time.
Yeah.
I want to know, and I want to check your suicidality and things like that. I want to find out that you're going to your doctor. I want to find out that you're taking care of yourself. Basically, we want to make sure you have a foundation to be able to process.
Okay.
And if not, we're going to work on that. We're going to work on coping skills. We're going to work on some techniques and things to help you to have the resources you need to walk out the door and not lose it.
Yeah. So, does PTSD, does it kind of, one of the things that that happens, do you get assigned like a buddy like you do in AA, for example? I mean, I'm just kind of shooting in the dark here because this is new information to me. But
what do you mean by a buddy? Like,
well,
so
like
if you
like in AA, and I haven't been to AA, but I just know about it.
Yes.
You get assigned a sponsor.
Yeah.
And they're that person you call at 3 o'clock in the morning when you're having a rough time. So is that?
If you were to do a group support,
Okay.
like if there was a group support, so things like that happen.
Okay.
Oftentimes coming into me, I cannot legally share my other clients' information or anything like that.
Okay.
So no, but the thing is, what's interesting is we usually find those. We find our people who know. We find the people who've been there, and then we share our stories. We share those events. So no, I don't assign you a buddy.
Okay.
But if you went to a trauma support group, you would create those buddies, and they might. Again, it depends on the facilitator and how they set that group up.
Okay, so it's kind of like we've mentioned we're both widowed, and so we always say we have our people.
Yes, we do.
So it's kind of like that.
Yes.
You know,
Well, and think about that when we are in our group with our widow people, just like we were on Saturday. We talk about stuff. We talk about the spouses. We talk. We share that. We commemorate with and share, and it helps form those connections.
Yeah.
And so you're going to, if you're in a group, and it even forms connections with your therapist. I know for me that I don't share everything about my story like this. Like I tell you bits and pieces, but I'm not telling you everything.
Yeah.
But it will allow people to connect with me because I'm gonna get it, right?
Yeah.
And then again, the book talks about that, how very important it is that the people treating you get it. I have my clients who come in and they've been to an EMDR therapist, they've done this, but they are like, nope, because they don't feel like the client, they're just there. The therapist is just there. Where I've been down the road. I understand. And again, it's not about me, but there's a connection that happens in sharing that I understand trauma. I understand the work of EMDR. So yeah, those things really get affected.
Yeah. Okay. That's good to know. Yeah. You know, this is
good information. Who
Yeah,
knew?
good
Hashtag good.
information. Yeah. So, just kind of, I have so many thoughts in my mind. I just want to keep this on track. So, PTSD. It's both physical and emotional, and it can affect us in both ways. Does it happen kind of simultaneously? I mean,
It can.
Do we feel like just no hope and?
You can have all of it all at once. The truth is, the answer to this question is it's all going to depend on the person. Everybody's just like we're different in life.
Probably the event.
Yep.
Too. You know?
Not just the event, but we're different. We're different people.
Yeah.
So how you respond won't be the same. There might be aspects of it, but you are you, and I am me, and we're going to respond different. Sorry, my nose. It's just. But again, one of the things going back that the book talks about again is it affects and going about the effects of the brain. It's just the imagination. The inability. Part of imagination is the hope that there's a future, the hope that we can believe in that something can get better. Trauma and PTSD can affect that, and so we really get the despair right?
Yeah.
But there's another side that, going back to what you were saying, that it's really powerful to be able to connect with a person who's been there, done that. Like that's why the book talks so much about the Vietnam vets, is because they all got it. They've gone through the experiences. They were different, but they were so similar.
Yeah.
And so they understood, and they understood the responses. When I've been to AA or I've been to different groups, we tend to gravitate towards the people that get it, that understand. I remember we went to a conference once. They were asking how your spouse had died, and so they linked us because again, that connection. You know, who died of heart attack, who died of suicide, who died of cancer, who died of illness, who died of a car accident. Yeah, and so all these different ways that people were dying and loop them together. And I've thought of this time, like there's there are people in my group that I connect with because they had this sudden, like, it was a knock on my door, and that's how I found out my husband's in the hospital.
Yeah.
Like, I wasn't a cancer where it was over time. It was, that's how I found. And so that's another thing to notice is that your individuality, you might find commonality, but you're going to have individuality in that commonality.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of what we've discovered in our group. Just kind of revert back to that as a reference point for a minute. Is there is literally every kind of death in our group. If you can think of a way to die, somebody died that way. Sorry, not to make laugh, but you know, and so yeah, just everyone in the group did not lose their spouse to cancer, for example. But yeah, and so I think some of us, when we first, and we'll talk about losing a spouse for a minute, and because that's what we can talk about here in common for a minute, but you know, it's very traumatic either way, whether it was in an instant or you had time to prepare for it. That trauma is very real, yet it's different for each person. Because to me, had I lost my spouse in an instant, I think that'd be more traumatic. And
see, and which is interesting because I think it would be harder to watch somebody suffer over time.
Yeah, see, and that's,
and we're so different. And it's what's interesting is we both think the other person's way would be the
really
easier.
Yeah,
and it is our experience. One of the things again about trauma that I want to make a point is that we can get stuck.
Yeah, we've talked about
again in grief we can get struck.
Yeah,
We can get stuck. In life, we can get stuck. So it's not just anything, but we can get stuck in our trauma.
Yeah, and that's really why we're doing these videos, is we want people that have had trauma, grief, events in life, we want to help you move forward from those events.
Yep.
And so, yeah, let's talk about that for a minute. Is, you know, how can we've been diagnosed with PTSD.
Or trauma.
How can we kind of ourselves, okay, now I recognize that as my diagnosis. I think there's probably a level of acceptance that goes with that. Maybe, you know? Yeah.
Again, I love Russell's questions because I'm sitting there going, when you ask him, like, for some people, no.
Yeah.
Some people never accept, and I think that's when you see people who will go their life without ever getting treatment, is that they have a hard time accepting that this was their life, that this is what they went through, or that it was traumatic, or that it was hard on the body. And so there seems to be an awareness that comes about that, I saw your question, Natalie, just 1 second. There seems to be an awareness that comes around that when we become aware of what we're going through, that
well, I noticed when I was going through the stages of grief, I remember going through that physical phase where I hurt.
Yes.
You know, and walking up the stairs in my house at the time, I felt like I was like 85 years old. Why can't I walk up these stairs? You know, and so
Thanks for saving me. My brain went out the window.
I think a lot of times we forget to talk about the physical aspects of what it has, and that's why this book has been so helpful. You know?
Well, there's this physical aspect again, and when we get stuck in trauma, we have a hard time coming around, and that was the point I was trying to make, is there was an adjustment that when we finally start to become aware, then we can act. When we don't see, how do you go change a light bulb if you don't know a light bulb needs to be changed?
Yeah.
Right? You ever driven your car and you had no idea your car light was burnt out because you can't tell, and then all of a sudden both lights are, you look and like, oh, I got to change the light bulb. So once we become aware, then we can act. But when we aren't aware, how do we act?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's the part, and that was the part that my brain squirreled on, but I was trying to come back to, was that once we are aware, then you can start to act. You can still disassociate and avoid it, but action usually happens, and it doesn't happen until awareness. And awareness can happen because of somebody else. You can go, hey, Russell, you're still crying a lot. It's been 3 years, and you seem to be really struggling from some depression and things like that. I think you might need to go see somebody. Can I help you with that?
I think that's a good idea, because we talked about this just for a minute, is finding your support group. And I went to a funeral yesterday, and I was chit-chatting with, so you can tell how old I am when I say these old-timey words, chit-chatting with some of the people there.
And I say talking.
And I didn't know this lady, but a lady that I knew knew her and we started talking to her. She was under 35, and we had mentioned, we started kind of talking about support groups, and she mentioned that she was in a support group for young divorced people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, because the experience that we've had, I think it's important to find your niche, to find your people that understand you. You know, because, I go back again, I talk about what I know. When I lost my wife, no one knew what to say to me. No one.
Even the people who
even
have
my
gone
parents,
through it.
even my mom.
Well, I know that as a widow, I still sometimes am like, I have no idea what to tell you.
Yeah.
Like, and I've been through it, and I still don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, and so talk about is finding a support mechanism for us so we don't go through this alone.
Well, let's go to that question. But first, Natalie had asked, what's the difference between trauma and PTSD?
Oh, okay.
PTSD is the only diagnosable in the DSM that we have for trauma. In truth, there's not a lot of differences. You can have everything with PTSD. PTSD is just the diagnosis that we give you, that you can actually get. So it's post-traumatic stress disorder. It's that diagnosis. Unfortunately, we don't have anything else to diagnose trauma under. And so trauma itself can be an event, but PTSD is that diagnosis. This is what you get as a diagnosis. This is... I often can kind of say what I think about to help the difference between just trauma and PTSD. PTSD is more extensive. There's more, again, you can go down that list, boom, 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 where trauma can be something that you see, but you only have one or two of those events. Again, trauma can be, you only have 4, not all 5. You have to have all those things to be diagnosed with, and that's how you get PTSD. It's just a diagnosis. It doesn't mean that you weren't in a traumatic
and
situation.
it's not to minimize trauma either. I mean, there's
no, we just
suck
in DSM world. We just do not have diagnosis for it, and we should. I think, and again, it's something that's ever evolving and stuff like that. But I wish we had more diagnosis for different types of trauma. Even grief, like we just don't have a lot, and then it's not even billable and stuff like that. So. Yes.
Great. Well, Terry, I think we've had a great conversation tonight. Do you have any?
Well, I want to check in. Are there any other questions? Natalie, I appreciate that one question. But I'm just going to give it a moment to see if anything surfaces.
Again, if you have questions and you type them in after we close, type them in the comments and Terry will get to them. Or private message her as well if you don't want it on a public forum. If you have a quick question
Heart of Peace Counseling on Facebook, Heart of Peace Counseling on Instagram, Terry Talks Therapy and Trauma on YouTube. That is also on, what's the one I'm thinking of?
Instagram, Snapchat.
TikTok.
Okay.
So you can find me in all those places. The video will be posted. After this, we'll post it and things like that. Please share.
You can say please share because there are people that we're trying to target that may not be in our target audience that need this information. So please share if you know people in your
I'm going to say we're trying to find the people who need this, not target.
Yeah, target.
Because target might traumatize somebody. But just like, share, things like that. We're trying to figure out how to get things more out there and everything like that. So again, things are going to be posted. The video will post to Facebook. It'll also post to YouTube and links and things like that. Any questions that you had after reading the book that you wanted to cover that we did?
I think we had a really good discussion on it. I think it's good. I think we did a good job of explaining what PTSD and then kind of the difference between trauma. So I appreciate that question, Natalie. And
going back to just the last statement is just in that oftentimes people who are traumatized or PTSD sufferers, whatever way you diagnose that and want to talk about that, there is oftentimes they don't let people in if you don't have this shared experience. And there's something about the shared experience. There's something about sharing that experience and things like that that really help. So it's really beneficial. Oh, it's okay, Sarah. We're glad. We hope you can come back and watch the rest of it. Sarah just said that she missed it. We're working on this. I think I needed to be better. I was trying this time that I was just going to advertise at the end. But I actually think I have to do a mix of both. I'm going to have to advertise before and after to make the right the right fit. But we're glad to see you guys. Again, we also have the other video already up, so you are welcome to see that either on Heart of Peace Counseling or on Facebook. And then we will be back next week.
And we're glad that we're in a more harmonious, not upside down
We're not upside down.
frame this time.
And I'm not ignoring Russell, looking at the screen, trying to see the comments. Actually, this really worked in seeing the comments. But, so, yes, we thank you. I love the hearts.
Yeah,
I appreciate you guys. Anything, like I said, we look forward to doing this some more. And I'm going to go stand up and turn this off.
yeah, have a Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Guten Tag, all those great things. Just well wishes.
Thank you.
Thank you.